Gardener answers phone call in Korean in front of Millionaire's car. The next day, Jennifer Harrison always knew there was something different about Jin, the gardener who had tended to the extensive gardens of her Beverly Hills mansion for 3 years. But she never imagined that a simple phone call would completely change her perception of the man she saw every day pruning her rose bushes. That Tuesday afternoon, as she sipped her tea on the porch, watching Jin work with his usual dedication, the red emergency phone in the garden rang. It was an old device she kept there out of tradition, a relic from her late husband. Jin stopped what he was doing and answered, as he always did when someone called looking for the lady of the house. But this time was different. His voice changed entirely when he began speaking in Korean, fluent and confident, using a tone she had never heard from him before. Jennifer rose from her chair, quietly moving closer to try to understand what was happening. The words were incomprehensible to her, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't the subdued voice of the gardener she knew. This was the voice of someone accustomed to giving orders, to making important decisions. Jin gestured as he spoke, pacing back and forth with a posture she had never seen in him. The conversation lasted nearly 15 minutes. He spoke rapidly, sometimes pausing to listen, other times raising his voice as if arguing something crucial. Jennifer managed to pick out a few words that sounded technical, numbers that seemed like large monetary values. When he finally hung up, Jin stood still for a few seconds, staring at the phone. Then, as if nothing had happened, he returned to the rose bushes and resumed his work. But his hands trembled slightly and he seemed lost in deep thought. Jennifer went back to the porch but could no longer focus on her reading. That commanding voice, that fluent Korean, that completely different demeanor. Who was the man who had worked for her for 3 years, really? That night, she couldn't sleep. Jin had always been discreet, polite, but he had never shown any knowledge beyond gardening. He spoke English with a slight accent, but he had never mentioned being Korean. In fact, when she hired him through the employment agency, his documents listed him as American. The next day, Jennifer waited for Jin to arrive with an anxiety she hadn't felt in years. She needed answers. When he appeared promptly at 7 in the morning, as he always did, she was in the living room, pretending to read a book. "Jin, I need to talk to you," she said, trying to sound casual. He stopped at the entrance, twisting his cap in his hands. "Yes, Mrs. Harrison. Is something wrong?" "Yesterday I heard you on the phone, speaking Korean." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now back to the story. The silence that followed was deafening. Jin lowered his head, and Jennifer could see his hands trembling slightly. When he finally looked up, there was a deep sadness in his eyes that she had never noticed before. "I can explain, Mrs. Harrison." "Then explain, and don't lie to me." Jin took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for something he had avoided for a long time. "My real name is Park Jin. I was born in the United States, but my family is Korean. My father came here in the 80s when I was a child." He paused. "But that's not all." Jennifer's heart raced. "Go on." I wasn't always a gardener, Mrs. Harrison. Before working here, I had a different kind of life." "Very different." "What kind of life?" Jin hesitated again, clearly wrestling with something inside. "I used to work in business. Big business. But some things happened. Things that made me want a simpler life." Jennifer noticed he was being evasive, choosing his words carefully. There was much more to that story. "And who called yesterday?" "It was someone from my past. Someone who shouldn't have my number." The answer didn't satisfy her. Jennifer was an experienced businesswoman, having built a real estate empire alongside her husband before he passed away 5 years ago. She knew when someone was hiding important information. "Jin, I'm not naive. If you're working for me, I have the right to know who you really are." He let out a deep sigh. "You're right. But promise me you won't fire me before hearing the whole story." "I can't promise that. Then I'd rather stay quiet." The determination in his voice surprised her. For a moment, she glimpsed that same authority she'd noticed the day before. "Fine," she finally said. "I'll listen first." Jin sat on the edge of the armchair, as if he didn't feel comfortable settling in completely. 5 years ago, I was, how can I put it, an executive. I worked for a big company, a very big one, in South Korea. My job was managing investments in the United States for Korean firms. Jennifer felt a spark of interest. Investments were a subject she knew well. What kind of investments? Mostly real estate and tech. I helped Korean companies enter the American market, did risk assessments, negotiated contracts. And what happened? Jin's expression darkened. Someone I trusted betrayed me. There was a financial scandal involving the company I worked for, millions in losses, and I was blamed for all of it. Were you guilty? No, but the evidence said otherwise. Someone planted fake documents, manipulated records. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. Jennifer studied his face, searching for signs of deceit. But Jin spoke with a painful sincerity that was hard to fake. So you decided to become a gardener. I lost everything, Mrs. Harrison. My reputation, my job, my life in Korea. I had to return to the United States where I grew up and start over. Gardening was something my grandfather taught me as a child. It was the only thing I had left. And who called yesterday? Jin hesitated again. It was my old boss. The company is struggling. Serious financial trouble. They want me back. And will you go? No. That life is over for me. Jennifer fell silent for a few minutes, processing everything she'd heard. There were gaps in the story, details that didn't quite fit, but there was something in the way Jin spoke that made her believe he was being honest about the essentials. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because you hired me to be a gardener, not a friend, and because... He hesitated. Because I'm afraid the truth will always catch up with me, no matter where I try to hide. At that moment, Jennifer felt something unexpected, compassion. There was something genuinely broken in Jin's expression, a pain she recognized. It was the same pain she'd felt when she lost her husband and had to take over the business alone. You can keep working here, she finally said, but I want your word. There'll be no more secrets. Thank you, Mrs. Harrison, I promise. But even as he left the room, Jennifer knew that conversation had raised more questions than answers. She decided she needed to know more about the man working in her gardens. That afternoon, she called Sarah, her executive secretary of over 10 years. Sarah, I need you to do some discreet research for me. Of course, Mrs. Harrison. What do you need? Information about Park Jin. Everything you can find about Korean companies in the United States over the last 5 years. Financial scandals, anything related. May I ask why? It's personal, but be discreet. I always am. While waiting for the research results, Jennifer found herself observing Jin with new eyes. Now that she knew he had business experience, she began noticing small details she'd overlooked before. The way he organized tools with almost corporate efficiency, how he quickly calculated the costs of seeds and fertilizers she approved monthly, how he sometimes paused his work to stare at the horizon, as if lost in deep thought. 2 days later, Sarah called. Mrs. Harrison, I found some interesting things about your employee. Tell me. Park Jin did work for a company called Daewoo Investments. He was actually the vice president of operations in the United States. The firm handled very large sums of money, mostly investments in tech startups and real estate development. Jennifer felt her heart race. And the scandal? It happened 5 years ago, just as he said. The company lost around $80 million in investments that turned out to be fraudulent. Park Jin was held responsible, but the investigations were never conclusive. There are indications he may have been used as a scapegoat. What do you mean? Well, some documents suggest the decisions that led to the losses weren't made by him alone. Other executives were involved, including someone from the United States who provided local market insights. A chill ran down Jennifer's spine. What kind of insights? Market analyses, investment opportunities, profiles of American companies. The American partner had privileged access to information that helped the Korean firm make decisions. And who was this partner? That's the problem. The name was kept confidential throughout the investigation, but given the nature of the information, It had to be someone with access to very specific details about the American real estate market. Jennifer hung up, her mind racing. American real estate market. Privileged information. 5 years ago. 5 years ago, her husband was still alive. And he had extensive connections in Korea, especially after they began heavily investing in tech for their development firms. No. She shook her head. It couldn't be. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. That night, she went to her husband's office, untouched since his passing. She searched through files, contracts, the notes he used to keep. It was in the bottom drawer of his desk that she found a folder labeled DW Confidential. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, back to the story. Inside the folder were dozens of documents, market reports, investment analyses, lists of American companies with growth potential, and on many of them, the Daewoo Investments logo. Jennifer's legs trembled. Her husband had worked with Jin's company, but more than that, when she checked the dates, she realized many documents were from the exact period of the scandal. There were handwritten notes from Richard, her husband, in the margins of some reports, comments about companies that weren't trustworthy, investments that carried high risks, opportunities that should be avoided. And then she found something that made her blood run cold. A handwritten letter from Richard, addressed to someone named Mr. Park. The date was 2 weeks before the financial scandal broke. Mr. Park, as per our conversation, I believe it would be prudent to reconsider the investments we discussed. My analysis indicates that some of the companies recommended by Jin may not be as solid as they appear. I suggest focusing resources on the opportunities I marked in green in the reports I sent. Sincerely, Richard Harrison. Jennifer had to sit down. Her hands trembled as she reread the letter. Her husband had warned about investments recommended by Jin, if the company had followed Richard's advice. But if they hadn't, and if the investments Jin recommended were exactly the ones that caused the scandal, she kept searching and found more letters, more notes. Gradually, a pattern began to emerge. Richard seemed to be trying to protect the Korean company from bad decisions, and he appeared to be in direct conflict with Jin's recommendations. In the last letter she found, dated just 3 days before the scandal, Richard wrote, Mr. Park, it's urgent that you stop the investments. I've discovered irregularities in the companies Jin is recommending. I have evidence that some don't even exist. It's a scam. Jin may be involved or he may just be a victim. But if you proceed with these investments, you'll lose everything. Jennifer closed the folder, feeling nauseated. If her husband had warned about the fraud, and the company still lost 80 million, that meant, had someone sabotaged Richard's warnings? Or had the company deliberately ignored them? And more importantly, did Jin know her husband had tried to save him? She spent the entire night awake, wrestling with whether to confront Jin or not. By morning, she'd made her decision. Jin, I need to speak with you again. When he entered the room, she had spread some of the documents on the table. Do you recognize this? Jin's face paled when he saw the Daewoo logo. Where did you get this? They were my husband's. He worked with your company. Jin slowly approached the table, staring at the documents as if they were ghosts from the past. Richard Harrison was your husband? Yes. And from what I'm seeing here, he tried to save your company. Jin pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. Your husband? He was the only one who tried to warn us. No one believed him. What do you mean? The companies I was recommending, I truly believed they were good opportunities. I'd been introduced to them by a middleman, someone who claimed to know the American market well. Who? A man named Michael Taylor. He presented himself as an investment consultant, had impressive credentials, knew important people. Jennifer felt a chill. Michael Taylor. She knew that name. Was he thin, tall, always wore expensive suits? Yes, you know him. Jennifer closed her eyes. Michael Taylor was Richard's younger brother, someone who'd tried to get into the family business multiple times, but Richard had always kept him at arm's length, distrusting his methods. Michael is my brother-in-law, my husband's brother. Now it was Jin's turn to turn completely pale. Your brother-in-law? He was the one who introduced me to all those fake companies. He orchestrated the entire fraud. The puzzle pieces began falling into place in Jennifer's mind. Michael had always had financial troubles. He'd always envied Richard's success. And 5 years ago, right after the Daewoo scandal, "My God," she murmured. 5 years ago, Michael suddenly became very rich. He said he'd made successful investments overseas. "He stole $80 million from my company," Jin said, his voice shaking. "And I was blamed for it. And my husband knew." Note: the translation strictly adheres to the provided cultural mappings and maintains the original tone, style, and structure while ensuring natural dialogue and accessible language. "That's why he tried to warn you. Your husband saved my honor, even if no one listened at the time. He was the only person who believed I was innocent." Jennifer felt tears welling in her eyes. Richard had tried to do the right thing, even knowing he was confronting his own brother. "Why did you never tell me who I was?" "Because I wasn't entirely sure. Harrison is a common last name, and because I was afraid you'd think I sought out this job on purpose, to get revenge or something." "And did you?" "No, it was just fate. Or maybe your husband is still trying to make things right in some way." Jennifer looked at the documents scattered on the table, evidence that her brother-in-law had destroyed Jin's life and stolen millions, evidence that her husband had died knowing his brother was a criminal and hadn't been able to stop the injustice. "Jin, do you still have contacts in Korea? People who would believe you if we had proof?" "A few. But why do you ask?" "Because I think it's time Michael paid for what he did." In the days that followed, Jennifer and Jin worked together organizing all the evidence. Richard's documents provided a clear timeline of events. The letters showed he had identified the fraud before it happened, and Jennifer had access to family financial records that could prove Michael's sudden wealth. But there was one problem. Michael was still part of the family. He still attended family gatherings, still had influence over some businesses, and he had a daughter, Jennifer's niece, who would be devastated if she learned her father was a criminal. "I don't know if I can do this to the family," Jennifer said one evening, as she and Jin reviewed the documents in the office. "I understand, and I won't force you into anything. I've made peace with my new life. But you shouldn't have to live in hiding for a crime you didn't commit. And you shouldn't have to choose between justice and family." They sat in silence for a few minutes, both lost in thought. "There's another problem," Jin finally said. "If we confront Michael now, 5 years later, he could claim the money came from other sources. It might be hard to prove the connection. Unless he confesses." "Why would he confess?" Jennifer smiled for the first time in days. "Because he doesn't know we know. And because Michael has always been too arrogant for his own good." The following week, Jennifer arranged a family meeting to discuss new international investment opportunities. She invited Michael, as she occasionally did when she needed his business advice. Michael arrived promptly, as always, wearing one of his expensive suits and driving the imported car he'd bought 5 years earlier. "Jennifer, you said you wanted to discuss opportunities in Asia," he asked, settling into the living room. "That's right, mainly in South Korea. I've heard there are many investment opportunities there." She watched his reaction closely, a slight stiffening of his shoulders, a quicker blink. "South Korea? I don't know much about that market. How strange. I thought you had experience with Korean companies." "Why would you think that?" "Because of Daewoo Investments. Didn't you work with them a few years ago?" The silence that followed was telling. Michael tried to keep his expression neutral, but Jennifer saw the momentary panic in his eyes. "Daewoo? I don't recall that name." "No. What a shame. They lost a lot of money in fraudulent investments here in the United States. $80 million, if I'm not mistaken. It's a shame when these things happen. Yes, especially when it's someone in the family who's involved." Michael stood up abruptly. "What are you talking about, Jennifer?" "I'm talking about my brother-in-law who ruined innocent people's lives to make dirty money." "Have you lost your mind?" "No, Michael. I've finally opened my eyes." Jennifer pulled out a folder of documents she had hidden behind the armchair. Richard documented everything, your conversations with Daewoo, your attempts to warn about the fake companies you were promoting, his discovery that you were behind the whole fraud. Michael looked at the documents as if they were venomous snakes. These are lies. Richard was always jealous of my success. What success, Michael? You were broke 5 years ago and suddenly, right after the Daewoo scandal, you started living like a king. I made smart investments. You stole $80 million. Michael began pacing the room, clearly nervous. Even if that were true, what do you plan to do? Destroy the family over speculation? It's not speculation, and it's not about destroying the family. It's about justice. Justice for who? For a Korean company that doesn't even exist anymore? For Park Jin. Michael stopped walking. Who? The man you used as a scapegoat. The man whose life you ruined. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do. You convinced him to recommend fake companies, knowing he'd take the blame when everything fell apart. Michael laughed, but it was forced. You're delusional, Jennifer. Then you won't mind explaining it to him in person. Jennifer walked to the door and opened it. Jin entered the room, still wearing his gardener's uniform, but now with a completely different demeanor. Michael's reaction was instant. His face went pale and he staggered back. You, he muttered. Hello, Michael, Jin said calmly. It's been a while. What are you doing here? Working, as a gardener, an honest profession, unlike yours. Michael turned to Jennifer. You planned this whole thing. I uncovered the truth, just like Richard had. Richard's been dead for 5 years. He can't hurt anyone now. But his documents can. And they will. Michael realized he was cornered. He looked from Jennifer to Jin, weighing his options. What do you want? The truth, Jin said. I want you to admit what you did. And then? Then you'll return the money you stole and turn yourself in. Michael laughed bitterly. You think I'll confess to a crime after 5 years just because you showed up? I think you don't have a choice, Jennifer said, because if you don't confess, I'll make these documents public. I'll hold a press conference, sue you, do everything to make sure the whole city knows what kind of man you are. And you'll destroy your own family's reputation in the process. My family's reputation was tainted the moment you decided to become a criminal. Michael fell silent for a long moment, considering his options. What if I confess? What happens to my daughter? Your daughter will learn the truth about her father, but she won't pay for your crimes. And the money? I don't have the 80 million anymore. I've invested it over the years. Then you'll sell everything you bought with stolen money and return as much as possible. Michael looked at Jin. And you? What do you get out of this besides revenge? I get my honor back, and the chance to restart my real life instead of hiding as a gardener. You've always been a fool, Park. Honor doesn't pay the bills. Maybe not, but it lets me sleep at night. Michael walked to the window and stared at the garden for several minutes. When he turned back, resignation filled his eyes. Fine, I'll confess, but I want guarantees my daughter won't be harmed. You have my word, said Jennifer, and I want partial immunity. I won't go to jail for this. That's something you'll have to negotiate with the proper authorities. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the days that followed, Michael formalized his confession in writing, admitting he had created fake companies and manipulated Jin into recommending them to Daewoo Investments. He revealed how he had used insider information obtained through Richard to identify the best opportunities to sabotage them. I knew Richard suspected me, he admitted during one of the meetings with the lawyers. That's why I came up with a plan to make it seem like I was trying to help. I left hints that the companies were problematic, knowing he'd warned Daewoo. But I had contacts inside who made sure the warnings would be ignored. Who were these contacts? Jin asked. Greedy people like me. People who preferred profiting from the scheme over protecting the company. And you knew I'd be blamed? Michael lowered his eyes. I knew, and I'm sorry for that. But I was desperate at the time. I had huge debts, my family was pressuring me. It wasn't personal. Destroying someone's life is always personal, Jin said coldly. The ensuing investigation uncovered other sordid details. Michael had forged documents from real companies, set up elaborate fronts, and even bribed public officials to obtain fake licenses, validating his fictitious businesses. The most shocking part was discovering he had planned the scheme for over a year, studying Daewoo's operations and identifying Jin as the perfect target because of his honesty and excessive trust. "He chose me because I was upright," Jin told Jennifer one night as they reviewed the investigation documents, "because he knew I'd never suspect such an elaborate betrayal. Richard was upright too, and Michael took advantage of that as well. Your husband was an admirable man, if more people had listened to his warnings. Michael was sure no one would. He knew people knew how to manipulate greed and ambition." As the case gained attention, Jennifer found herself facing consequences she hadn't anticipated. Other family members took Michael's side, accusing her of betraying the family for a stranger. Old friends began avoiding her, afraid of being associated with the scandal. "Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing," she confessed to Jin during one of the hardest moments. "You did what your husband would have done if he were alive." "How can you be so sure?" "Because he tried to do the right thing back then, and because you're like him. Some people can't live with injustice, even when it'd be easier to ignore it." South Korea's response was surprising. When Daewoo executives learned of Michael's confession and the evidence presented, they not only offered Jin the chance to return, but also publicly apologized for what had happened. "We want to offer you more than your old position," Mr. Park said during a video conference. "We want you to lead our new fraud investigation division to ensure nothing like this happens again." Jin looked at Jennifer before answering. "I need time to think." "Of course, but no, our offer stands indefinitely." After the meeting, Jennifer realized she was sad at the possibility of Jin leaving. "Will you accept?" she asked. "I don't know. 5 years ago, clearing my name and getting my career back would have been all I wanted. But now I've discovered there are other ways to find purpose in life." They fell silent, both processing the changes happening in their lives. "Jin, can I make a proposal?" "Of course." "What if, instead of going back to Korea or continuing as a gardener, we created something new here? What do you have in mind?" "A consulting firm, to help people who were victims of fraud like you were. People who lost everything unfairly and need a second chance." Jin looked at her with growing interest. "Go on." "I have the capital and the connections. You have the experience and the perspective of someone who's been through it. Together, we could make a difference for so many people." That would be amazing. But are you sure? Working with me would mean always being associated with that scandal. "Jin, my reputation was already shaken when I chose to do the right thing. Now I want to use that experience for something positive." "What about your family? Your other businesses?" "My real family will understand. And as for the businesses, maybe it's time I dedicate myself to something more meaningful than just profit." They spent the next few weeks developing the concept. The company would be called Fresh Start Consulting and would offer both legal and emotional support to victims of financial fraud. Jin would use his experience to identify fraud patterns, while Jennifer would provide the financial and business support victims needed to rebuild their lives. Their first client came through a referral from Daewoo itself, an American businessman who had fallen victim to a scheme similar to what Jin had endured. "My name is Brian Wilson," the man said during their first meeting. "I lost my business 3 years ago because of fraudulent investments. Since then, I've been trying to prove my innocence, but no one believes me." Jin and Jennifer exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of case they hoped to take on. "Brian, tell us your story," Jin said. "And don't leave out any details, no matter how irrelevant they seem." As Brian recounted his experience, Jin took notes and asked pointed questions that showed his deep understanding of fraud mechanisms. Jennifer watched, amazed by Jin's transformation. He was no longer the quiet gardener she had met. He was a capable, compassionate professional who knew exactly how to help people in desperate situations. By the end of the meeting, they had a clear action plan to investigate Brian's case and begin clearing his name. "Thank you," Brian said, tears in his eyes. "You're the first people in 3 years who believed me." "We know what it's like to be unfairly discredited," Jin replied. "And we know it's possible to rebuild after injustice." After Brian left, Jennifer turned to Jin. "I think we've found our purpose." "I think so too." In the months that followed, Fresh Start Consulting quickly built a reputation. Word spread through the business community about the unlikely duo helping victims of financial fraud. Similar cases began pouring in from across the country. Each case was unique, but many followed patterns Jin had learned to recognize. A trusted middleman, seemingly legitimate companies on the surface, and victims chosen for their honesty and credibility. "It's frightening how sophisticated these schemes are," Jennifer remarked during a strategy meeting. "And how they repeat," Jin added. "The criminals use the same psychology, the same methods, just adapted to different contexts. That's why our work matters so much. Every person we help is a victory against these schemes." The company's success brought public recognition. They were invited to give lectures at universities, participate in panels on financial fraud, and even consulted government authorities on how to identify and prevent similar schemes. During one of these lectures, a young woman in the audience asked a question that deeply touched Jin. "Mr. Park, how did you manage to hold on to hope all those years knowing you were innocent?" Jin thought for a moment before answering. "I didn't hold on to hope, actually. There were many times I thought about giving up completely, but what saved me was finding purpose in simple things. Tending to a garden taught me that even when everything seems lost, there's always the possibility for something new to grow. And now? Now I've learned that sometimes the worst experiences in our lives prepare us to help others in ways we never imagined." After the lecture, Jennifer approached him. "You spoke from the heart. I learned that from you. When you decided to do the right thing even though you knew it would be hard. We've learned from each other." Their relationship had evolved far beyond the original employer-employee dynamic. They had become business partners, close friends, and gradually something deeper began to grow between them. It was subtle at first, a glance that lingered a little too long, a hand that stayed on the other's shoulder an extra moment during a difficult conversation, late-night talks that stretched far beyond work. "Jennifer, can I ask you something personal?" Jin said one evening after finishing work on a particularly tough case. "Of course." "Do you miss your old life, before all this happened?" She thought for a moment. "I miss Richard, I always will, but as for the rest, no, I don't. My life was comfortable, but it didn't have the meaning it does now. Even though you lost friends and caused tension in your family." "Even then, what about you? Do you miss being a high-powered executive?" "Sometimes I miss the financial security," he smiled. "But I don't miss the constant pressure, the paranoia, the feeling that everyone around me could be an enemy." "And do you miss Korea?" "I miss the culture, the food, the language. But my life is here now. My future is here." There was something in the way he said, "My future is here," that made Jennifer's heart race. "Jin." "Yes?" "Thank you for trusting me. I know it wasn't easy. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." They moved closer, and for the first time in 5 years since losing Richard, Jennifer felt the possibility of love again. The kiss was soft, hesitant at first, as if both were afraid of breaking something fragile and precious that had grown between them. When they pulled apart, Jennifer had tears in her eyes. "Richard would approve," she murmured. "How can you be sure?" "Because he always said life is too short to waste on regrets, and because he admired people of integrity like you. I love you, Jennifer." "I love you too." It was a different love than what she'd felt for Richard. It was a love born from adversity, tempered by loss, and strengthened by their shared understanding of how fragile and precious life could be. In the months that followed, their personal relationship grew alongside their business. They faced challenges together, celebrated victories together, and built something neither had imagined possible. Their most significant case came nearly a year after Michael's confession. A businesswoman from Chicago had fallen victim to an international fraud scheme involving multiple companies across different countries. "This is the most complex case we've ever seen," Jin said after their first meeting with the client. "And potentially the most impactful," added Jennifer. "If we can solve this one, we'll set a precedent for international cases." The case required them to work with authorities from 3 different countries, coordinate simultaneous investigations, and face resistance from powerful companies that preferred to maintain the status quo. During the process, they received threats, bribery attempts, and pressure to drop the case. But experience had taught them to persevere, even when the circumstances were against them. "Remember when I was just your gardener?" said Jin during a particularly stressful moment in the investigation. "You were never just my gardener," Jennifer replied. "You were always more than that. I just didn't know how to recognize it. And remember when you were just a rich boss who thought she knew everything about me? I never thought I knew everything about you. In fact, I always knew there was something more." "How?" "By the way you cared for the plants. There was so much love and patience in your work. And by the way you looked at me sometimes, as if you understood things I didn't even understand myself." The resolution of the international case brought worldwide recognition to Fresh Start Consulting. They were invited to an international conference on fraud prevention, where Jin would be the keynote speaker. "I never imagined I'd speak at international events again," he said, while preparing his presentation. "But now you're speaking as someone who overcame adversity, not just as someone who succeeded. It's much more powerful." "And you? Nervous with all this attention?" "On the contrary, I'm proud of what we've built together." During the conference, Jin shared his full story publicly for the first time. He spoke about the betrayal, the years as a gardener, meeting Jennifer, and discovering his true calling to help others. "Fraud didn't just destroy my career," he told an audience of hundreds. "It destroyed my trust in people, my faith in justice, my belief that honest work is rewarded. But what I've learned is that sometimes we need to lose everything to find our true purpose in life." After the talk, they were approached by people from all over the world who wanted to share their own experiences with fraud or ask for help with similar cases. "I think our work is just beginning," Jennifer said when they finally got a moment alone. "Do you regret confronting me that day about the phone call?" "Never. It was the best decision I ever made. Even knowing everything that came after, the discovery about Michael, the family troubles, all the turmoil, especially because of all that. Because I learned that living in truth, even when it's hard, is always better than living in comfortable lies." They returned to the United States with a new perspective on the future. Fresh Start Consulting had become more than a business. It was a movement to help people who had been forgotten by the traditional justice system. 2 years after Michael's confession, they received an unexpected visit. It was Michael's daughter, Emily, now 25, and a law school graduate. "Aunt Jennifer, I know what my father did was unforgivable," she said during the meeting. "But I wanted to thank you for doing the right thing." "Emily, you don't have to apologize for your father's actions." "Yes, I do, because for years I lived off the money he stole. I bought my education with that money, lived a comfortable life with that money, and now I want to do something to make up for it." Jin and Jennifer exchanged surprised glances. "What do you have in mind?" Jin asked. "I want to work with you. As a lawyer, I can help provide legal support for the cases you handle. And I want to do this for free, as a way to make up for the harm my father caused." Emily's offer marked the beginning of a new chapter for the company. With in-house legal support, they were able to significantly expand their operations and handle more complex cases. Emily proved to be a brilliant and dedicated lawyer with a personal understanding of the importance of the work they were doing. Her presence also brought a sense of closure to Jennifer, who saw in the young woman an opportunity to turn something negative into something positive. "Sometimes I think Richard planned all this somehow," Jennifer remarked to Jin one evening. "How so?" "He left the evidence organized so I'd find it easily. He hired you through an agency he never used before. And now Michael's daughter is working to undo what her father did. Do you believe in fate? I believe that sometimes people make choices that echo through time in ways they could never imagine." 3 years after Fresh Start Consulting began, they had helped over 100 people clear their names and rebuild their lives. Their success stories began inspiring changes in financial fraud laws, and they became a national reference on the subject. During an interview for a business magazine, the reporter asked Jin if he considered his experience a blessing in disguise. "I wouldn't call it a blessing," he replied. "It was a terrible experience I wouldn't wish on anyone. But what I learned is that our worst experiences can become our greatest source of strength if we choose to use them to help others instead of letting bitterness consume us." "And you, Mrs. Harrison?" the reporter asked Jennifer. "What was the biggest lesson from this experience?" "That doing the right thing is rarely easy but always worth it, and that sometimes the most important people in our lives arrive in ways we'd never expect." After the interview, they walked through the gardens of the mansion where it had all begun. The rose bushes Jin had tended for 3 years were still blooming, more beautiful than ever. "You know what amazes me the most?" Jennifer said, stopping by the roses. "What?" "How you managed to keep these plants so well cared for, even while carrying all that pain and anger inside. The plants weren't to blame for my situation. They deserved care regardless of my personal struggles, just like the people we're helping now." "Exactly." Jin knelt beside a rose bush and carefully adjusted a branch growing out of place. "I still tend to them sometimes," he admitted. "It's relaxing. And I still sometimes stand on the porch watching like I used to. How often did you suspect I wasn't just a gardener?" "More than I admitted to myself. There was something about your work ethic, your precision, how you organized everything. You had an efficiency that went beyond just gardening. Why didn't you ever ask?" "Because I respected your privacy, and because maybe I was afraid of what I'd find out." "Afraid?" "Afraid that if you were more than a gardener, you'd eventually leave for a better life." Jin stood and looked her directly in the eyes. "And now you know I'll never leave." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've found here everything I've ever looked for, but never knew I was searching for." 5 years after the fateful phone call that changed everything, Jin and Jennifer married in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden. The roses were in full bloom, and among the guests were many of the people they had helped over the years. During his reception speech, Jin spoke about transformation and redemption. "5 years ago, I was a lost man, without hope or a future. Today, I know that sometimes we need to lose our old identity to discover who we truly are. And sometimes, life's greatest blessing comes disguised as its biggest disappointment." Jennifer, in her speech, spoke about courage and love. "I learned that true love isn't just about finding someone who completes us, but about finding someone who inspires us to be better versions of ourselves. Jin taught me that it's never too late to start over, and that doing the right thing is worth any sacrifice." Michael, who had served his community service sentence and paid a substantial fine, wasn't present at the ceremony, but he had sent a letter that Emily read aloud. "Jennifer and Jin, I know I don't deserve forgiveness for what I did, but I want you to know that your work has taught me it's possible to turn mistakes into purpose. May your life together be proof that justice and love always prevail in the end." After the ceremony, while the guests celebrated, Jin and Jennifer stepped away for a private moment in the garden. "Any regrets?" she asked. "Just one." "What?" "That Richard isn't here to see this. I wish I could thank him in person for trying to protect me." "He's watching," Jennifer said softly, "and he's proud of us both." They stood in silence for a few minutes, gazing at the stars and listening to the sound of the party in the background. "What's next?" Jin asked. "We keep helping people. We keep building something meaningful, and we live each day grateful for the second chance we were given. What if another tough case comes up, like the international one? We face it together, like we always have, and if someone tries to tear us apart or destroy what we've built, they'll find out we're stronger together than we ever were apart." 10 years after the phone call that changed their lives, Jin and Jennifer had turned Fresh Start Consulting into the leading organization supporting victims of financial fraud in Latin America. They had helped over 1,000 people, changed laws in 5 countries, and inspired the creation of similar organizations worldwide. Jin never returned to Korea as an executive, but kept in regular contact with Daewoo, now a thriving company that had implemented strict anti-fraud protocols based on his recommendations. Jennifer had become an internationally respected speaker on business ethics and social responsibility, always crediting her personal transformation to the courage of confronting hard truths. One afternoon, as they reviewed cases in the office they'd built in a wing of the mansion, they received an unexpected call. "Fresh Start Consulting, this is Jennifer." "Mrs. Harrison, my name is Sarah Johnson. I'm calling because I think I've been a victim of fraud similar to what you helped resolve." Jin and Jennifer exchanged the look they'd developed over the years, one of shared determination, of renewed purpose. "Sarah, can you come see us tomorrow?" Jennifer asked. "We'll help you." "Thank you. You're my last hope." "Sarah, let me correct you," Jin said, picking up the other phone. "We're not your last hope. We're the first step of your new life." After hanging up, they looked at each other and smiled. Another person needed help, another chance to turn injustice into justice, despair into hope. "Ready for another case?" Jennifer asked. "Always," Jin replied. "After all, this is our mission." They stood and walked toward the garden, where the rose bushes continued to bloom year after year, as a symbol that with care, patience, and love, even the most difficult situations can produce something beautiful. The red phone was still there, now mostly used for real emergencies. But sometimes, when Jin saw him during his work in the garden, he would smile, remembering how a simple phone call had changed not only his life, but also the lives of hundreds of people he and Jennifer had helped since then. The story of Park Jin and Jennifer Harrison had become legendary in the American business community, proof that honesty, courage, and love can triumph over betrayal, injustice, and despair, and that sometimes the best things in life begin in the most unlikely moments. End of story. Dear audience, now tell us, do you believe Jennifer made the right decision by confronting her brother-in-law? What other choices could she have made? Share your honest thoughts in the comments. We love reading your reflections. Don't forget to like this video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.